The early morning sun crept over the jagged outline of the Cascade Mountains, painting their horizon in bands of pale gold and fading blue. At Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, the day had already begun in a rush of rolling suitcases, long lines, and muffled announcements echoing across crowded terminals. Business travelers sipped coffee with weary eyes, families wrangled excited children, and students checked boarding passes on their phones. It was the sort of chaos that masked everyone's story, blending thousands of lives into one restless current. Gate C-18 buzzed with the usual pre-boarding chatter. A Boeing 737, sleek and white with the U.S. flag painted near its tail, stood ready for departure. Bound for Washington, D.C., the flight would cross the Rockies, glide over the Great Plains, and descend eventually into the nation's capital, a routine, unremarkable path flown countless times before. At least, that was how it appeared. Among the dozens shuffling forward with their boarding passes was a woman who attracted no notice at all. She was average in height, dressed in a plain navy jacket, jeans, and worn sneakers. Her dark hair was tied loosely at the back, a style chosen more for convenience than fashion. She carried only one bag of black carry-on that looked more functional than personal. Her stride was steady, unhurried, her eyes calm yet unusually observant, flicking briefly across the terminal before returning to the gate attendant. "Morning," the agent said automatically, scanning her pass. "Morning," she replied softly. Her voice was low, controlled, the kind that carried quiet confidence without the need for volume. The agent barely looked up, printing the small receipt and nodding her through. Within seconds, she disappeared down the jet bridge, indistinguishable from the crowd ahead of her. Inside the plane, passengers were already settling in with the practiced choreography of air travel stowing bags, checking seat numbers, and negotiating for overhead bin space. The woman reached row 14 and slid smoothly into the window seat, placing her bag beneath the seat in front of her. She leaned back without fuss, as though this routine had been lived countless times before. Her seatmate soon arrived, a college-age student with earbuds already in, and a middle-aged man in a pressed shirt, who immediately opened his laptop. Neither offered more than a cursory nod in her direction. She didn't mind. Blending in was second nature. The cabin filled quickly, and the flight attendants moved through with practiced efficiency. Safety checks, seatbelt reminders, polite greetings, it was all part of the rhythm. The captain's voice came over the intercom, friendly and casual, assuring everyone that the flight time would be just under 5 hours, with smooth conditions expected once they cleared the mountains. His words washed over most passengers, who were already absorbed in phones, books, or idle thoughts. The woman, however, listened intently, her gaze fixed out the window at the line of ground crew working near the wing. Every detail, every movement, registered in her mind. Years of training had made it a habit, always observing, always cataloging. She didn't just see a plane being prepped for flight. She saw the subtle coordination, the quiet signals, the pace of the operation. To her, it was more than routine. It was reassurance. Order meant safety. As the engines roared to life, a slight vibration rippled through the cabin. Children pressed their faces against the windows, marveling at the sight of wings flexing upward. The woman didn't move, her expression steady as the plane taxied to the runway. The takeoff roll was smooth, the acceleration pressing everyone briefly into their seats before the ground fell away, and the city shrank into a patchwork of streets and rooftops. At 30,000 feet, the world outside shifted into endless sky. The sun's light reflected sharply on the wings, casting a brilliant glare. Passengers settled into their routines, reading, napping, tapping on laptops. The cabin grew quieter, the initial flurry of activity giving way to the hum of flight. She remained still, her eyes following the curve of the horizon. She seemed detached, as if the mundane details of airline travel were beneath her notice. But in reality, her mind was alert, tracing every sound, every shift in motion. She could distinguish the normal creaks of pressurization from anything unusual. It wasn't paranoia. It was conditioning. Once, it had been her job to notice before others did. A flight attendant passed by, offering coffee and water. "Something to drink?" "Just water, thank you." Her response was polite but brief, accompanied by the faintest smile. The student beside her tried to start a conversation, pulling out one earbud. "Headed to D.C. for work?" he asked, his tone casual. She turned, meeting his eyes with a calm that carried both warmth and distance. "Yes," she said simply. The young man seemed to sense that was all he would get. He nodded, returned the earbud, and disappeared into his music. That was how she preferred it, anonymity. It was easier to move unnoticed when people thought you were just another traveler. Over the years, she had perfected the art of being invisible in plain sight. A quiet passenger, one of many. Nothing more. Still, there were moments like now, staring out at the sky, that pieces of her past crept in. Missions flown across hostile airspace, call signs traded over secure channels, the thunder of engines that carried far more weight than this civilian craft. She could almost hear it, faint echoes layered beneath the soft whir of the 737. But she shook it away, grounding herself in the present. That world was behind her, even if it never truly left. For the other passengers, the flight was nothing more than an inconvenience between destinations. For her, it was a reminder of how much the ordinary world relied on the unseen work of those who ensured its safety. And though no one on board knew it, their lives were about to brush against a truth that would shatter the illusion of routine. She took a slow breath, leaning back against the headrest. To anyone watching, she was calm, detached, almost bored. But inside, a part of her remained quietly vigilant, attuned to the sky, the engines, and the subtle rhythm of flight. She was not just a passenger. She was someone with a name, a history, and a call sign that once carried enough weight to halt entire operations. For now, though, she stayed silent, waiting, watching, letting the hours pass in anonymity. The flight had begun, and no one yet knew how quickly the ordinary could turn extraordinary. The cabin had settled into a rhythm. The initial chatter of boarding had faded, replaced by the low murmur of conversations, the faint hiss of air circulation, and the occasional clink of cups as flight attendants worked their way down the aisles. People were already retreating into their own worlds, laptops open, novels resting on tray tables, headphones sealing away the hum of engines. To most, it was just another flight, indistinguishable from the dozens they had taken before. And in the middle of it all sat the woman in seat 14A, perfectly blending into the anonymity of travel. She sat with her back straight but relaxed, arms resting lightly on the armrests, her gaze fixed on the clouds passing beneath them. Her posture was neither tense nor casual. It carried a balance that only someone trained to remain inconspicuous could achieve. She was there, but not there, visible, yet forgettable. When the flight attendant returned with the beverage cart, she offered a polite nod. "Anything for you, ma'am?" "Just water, please." Her voice was soft, even, measured. The attendant smiled and handed her a small plastic cup. For a brief second, their eyes met. The attendant thought she noticed something unusual in intensity in the woman's gaze, not threatening, but sharper than most passengers. She brushed it off quickly. Every flight had its eccentricities, and after hundreds of flights, faces blurred into a single canvas of ordinary humanity. The woman sipped her water and returned her eyes to the horizon, seemingly disinterested in everything else. Beside her, the student adjusted his earbuds again, shifting in his seat. He stole a quick glance at her, curiosity flashing across his face. He was young, probably in his early 20s, the kind who carried restless energy. For a while, he debated striking up a conversation again. After all, flights were long, and talking passed the time. So, he said finally, pulling one earbud out, headed to D.C. for work? Her eyes turned toward him, calm and steady. She gave the smallest of nods. Yes, what do you do? He pressed, leaning slightly closer, his tone casual but probing. She paused, measuring her words carefully. Consulting, she said at last, her lips curving into a faint, polite smile that gave away nothing. The student raised his eyebrows, intrigued but unsatisfied. Consulting was vague, deliberately so. He considered pushing further, but something in her demeanor, something about the way she held his gaze without breaking, made him reconsider. It wasn't unfriendly, but it was final. A conversation that ended before it began. Cool, he muttered, slipping the earbud back in. Within seconds, the music reclaimed him, and she was forgotten again. On the other side, the man in the pressed shirt barely noticed either of them. He was already buried in spreadsheets, tapping numbers with the focus of someone who lived his life in conference rooms and deadlines. If the woman beside him had disappeared entirely, he likely wouldn't have realized until the plane landed. That was exactly how she preferred it. Years of experience had taught her that invisibility was not about hiding, it was about blending in so seamlessly that people's eyes moved past you without recognition. It was the art of erasing significance in plain sight, of becoming forgettable, even as you occupied space. She had mastered it long ago, in places where standing out meant danger. She shifted slightly in her seat, drawing a notebook from her bag. To anyone watching, it looked like a simple journal, perhaps filled with personal reflections or travel notes. In reality, it contained neat, coded shorthand brief lines of thought she scribbled not for memory, but for discipline. She jotted a few words, closed the notebook, and slid it back into her bag. To the casual eye, it was nothing more than a traveler writing to pass the time. A few rows back, a family wrangled two small children who had grown restless. Crayons rolled onto the floor, juice boxes spilled, and patient apologies filled the aisle. The woman glanced once in their direction, her lips curving into the faintest smile at the scene. Normal chaos, ordinary life. She found comfort in it, things worth protecting, the kind of moments her past had been devoted to securing. The captain's voice broke the lull again. Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising at 36,000 feet. Weather's looking clear across most of our route. We'll be passing over the Rockies shortly. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the flight. Passengers murmured in response, some relieved, others uninterested. The words washed over the cabin like white noise. The woman closed her eyes briefly, not in rest, but in meditation. She counted her breaths, aligning them with the subtle rhythm of the engines. Years of conditioning never left her. She always monitored her surroundings, always attuned to the smallest anomalies. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. Even here, high above the ground, surrounded by civilians, she carried an awareness that set her apart. Yet no one noticed. To the flight attendants, she was polite but unremarkable. To her seatmates, she was quiet, forgettable. To the captain, she was just a name on a manifest. To the world around her, she was invisible. And that was the point. Still, invisibility carried weight. Beneath her calm exterior lay the history of someone who had not always been just another face in the crowd. There had been days when her name carried authority over squadrons, when her call sign traveled faster than her reputation. Days when her presence could shift the tide of a mission. Those days were behind her, or so she told herself. Now, she was content to let the world pass without recognizing her. She had chosen this quiet, this anonymity. But the sky has a way of testing those who try to leave their past behind. And even as she sat in silence, unnoticed, the events already unfolding miles ahead would soon drag her name back into the open. For now, though, she remained just another traveler. A quiet passenger in 14A. A face no one would remember when the flight ended. Her stillness was a shield. Her anonymity, her cover. And everyone around her accepted it without question, never realizing that the quietest passenger aboard carried the loudest legacy of them all. The plane had leveled into its cruising altitude, gliding steady and smooth above a blanket of clouds. Passengers grew comfortable, lulled into the rhythm of the flight. The hiss of recycled air, the quiet thrum of engines, the muted clink of ice in plastic cups. It was the language of normalcy, the background sound of a journey that should have been uneventful. The woman in 14 had noticed it. Not consciously at first, but through instinct. Something was missing. Something in the usual cadence of communications, subtle as the pause between heartbeats. She had flown enough times to know when captains checked in with air traffic control, when flight attendants quietly relayed updates to each other. Now there was a gap. A silence where there should not have been one. 2 rows behind her, a businessman chuckled into his phone, rehearsing a presentation. Across the aisle, a mother soothed a child with a tablet glowing cartoons. The ordinary masked the abnormal, but she felt it like a faint ripple under calm water. In Denver Center's control room, far below in Colorado, the anomaly was anything but faint. On their screens, the green icon of the Boeing 737 flickered, a transponder code briefly dropping before returning. Controllers leaned closer, adjusting headsets, trying multiple radio calls. Flight 762, Denver Center. Radio check. Silence. Flight 762, Denver Center. Acknowledge. More silence. Controllers exchanged looks. They checked their systems. Nothing wrong with the radar. Nothing wrong with the sector frequencies. The plane was still on course, altitude steady. But no voice came back from the cockpit. Protocol was clear. They escalated. Within minutes, a call reached NORAD's Western Air Defense Sector. The response was immediate. 2 F-22 Raptors, stationed at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, were scrambled. Their mission was precise: intercept, identify, and assess. Civilian flights rarely meant danger. 99 times out of 100, it was a faulty radio or a distracted crew. But the one time it wasn't, hesitation was unforgivable. Back in the 737, the first hints of unease crept into the cabin. A child peered out the window and pointed. "Mom, look!" The mother followed her child's finger, her eyes narrowing. Something was out there. Something sleek, dark against the sunlight. At first, she thought it was another passenger plane flying parallel. But then she saw the shape, the unmistakable silhouette of a fighter jet. Gasps rippled across the rows as more passengers pressed their faces to the windows. Whispers spread quickly, each one carrying more panic than the last. Is that a jet? Why would the military be out here? Is something wrong with the plane? The captain's voice cut in, calm but strained. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We appear to have lost communications with air traffic control. The aircraft you see outside is part of a standard safety procedure. There is no cause for alarm. His tone was even practiced, but the tremor beneath his words betrayed him. He knew the presence of Raptors wasn't ordinary. They didn't shadow passenger flights for technical glitches, unless those glitches had escalated. Passengers shifted nervously in their seats. The student beside 14A pulled out his earbuds, eyes wide. What the hell's going on? He muttered, half to himself. The woman didn't answer. Her gaze was locked on the fighter, studying its movement. The F-22 glided alongside with predatory grace, its canopy reflecting sunlight like a blade. She could almost feel the pilot's eyes on them, measuring, judging, waiting for instructions. Her pulse didn't quicken. Her breathing didn't change. She had seen this before many times, from the other side. She knew the silent language of formation, the way a fighter's posture shifted depending on orders, and the way this raptor flew. It wasn't merely observing. It was ready. The student noticed her calm. "You're not scared?" She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Fear doesn't help," she said simply. The answer unsettled him more than comforted. Across the cabin, panic brewed quietly. A man demanded answers from a flight attendant, his voice sharp, accusatory. "Why is the military here? Tell us the truth." The attendant repeated the captain's reassurance, but her eyes flicked nervously toward the window, betraying her own unease. The lie wasn't complete, and passengers sensed it. Anxiety spread like fire in dry grass. The woman in 1-4 remained still, her hands folded loosely in her lap. She could already imagine the conversation happening miles above in encrypted frequencies. The Raptor pilots would be calling in, confirming position, describing the situation. And someone at NORAD would be asking the same questions she used to ask. Who's on board? What's the threat? Do we take action? For the first time since boarding, she shifted. Her hands slid down to the black carry-on beneath her seat, fingertips brushing the worn handle. Inside was nothing unusual, at least nothing that would alarm TSA. But tucked in a side pocket was the card, the one she rarely used, but never traveled without. She hesitated. Once she revealed it, there would be no going back. The anonymity she had chosen, the silence she lived in, would vanish. People would remember her name again. Or rather, not her name, her call sign. She exhaled slowly, returning her hand to her lap. Not yet. Not unless it became necessary. The F-22 banked slightly, closing the gap, its angular frame cutting sharp against the sunlight. The passengers gasped again. A woman whispered, "They're going to shoot us down." The captain's voice returned, firmer now. "Please remain calm. There is no danger." But calm was gone. A sense of dread hung heavy in the air. Parents clutched children tighter. Businessmen glanced nervously at each other, and whispered theories filled the row's terrorism, hijacking, sabotage. The unknown gnawed at them, feeding fear. In the cockpit, the captain and first officer wrestled with dead radios, their hands moving quickly across switches and breakers. Nothing. They exchanged grim looks. The captain's jaw clenched. He knew what the jets meant. They weren't just here to escort, they were here to decide. And in 1-4A, the quiet passenger waited, her calm at odds with the rising storm. She knew the silence couldn't last. The Raptors wouldn't wait forever. Someone would need to act to bridge the void. The world around her buzzed with fear, but she sat steady, watching, calculating. She had walked away from her past, but the past had a way of circling back. And high above the clouds, with 2 Raptors closing in, the past was catching up fast. The air inside the cabin was no longer light with the dull comfort of travel. It was heavy, pressing down on every passenger like the unseen weight of the jets outside. The Boeing hummed forward, steady as ever, but the calm was gone. The moment the Raptors appeared, the illusion of safety cracked. A murmur spread through the rows, swelling and breaking like waves. People craned their necks toward the windows, trying to catch another glimpse of the dark, angular machines shadowing them. The mother with 2 children clutched her youngest closer, whispering reassurances she didn't quite believe herself. The businessman with the laptop had stopped typing entirely, staring out the glass with his jaw tight. A flight attendant moved briskly down the aisle, her professional smile faltering as she answered panicked questions. "Everything is fine. This is just a routine safety measure. but her voice trembled on the word routine, and the passengers heard it. They weren't convinced. The man across the aisle snapped, his voice sharp and rising above the hum. Routine? Do you think we're stupid? Fighters don't just show up for routine. What aren't you telling us? His outburst lit the spark. Others joined in, some demanding answers, others praying aloud. The fragile order inside the cabin splintered. The captain came over the intercom again, his tone firmer this time. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. The military aircraft are here as a precaution only. There is no threat to this flight. It should have been reassuring, but to many, it only confirmed the fear. If there were no threat, why were Raptors armed with missiles flying close enough for passengers to see their markings? In seat 14A, the woman remained composed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She studied the scene with the calm detachment of someone who had been in far worse situations. To her, the signs were clear. The cabin was reaching the edge of control. If the panic broke fully, the crew would lose authority, and chaos at 36,000 feet could be as dangerous as the jets outside. The student beside her pulled out his earbuds again, this time fully. He leaned closer, his voice low but urgent. You don't seem worried. Everyone else is freaking out, but you're just sitting there. Do you know something? Her eyes met his, steady, calm. I know panic won't help, she said softly. That's not an answer, he whispered harshly. Who are you? She didn't respond. Instead, she turned her gaze back to the window, where the F-22 held its position like a predator circling prey. Her silence was answer enough. Something about her wasn't ordinary. The tension spiked when the Raptor made a slow, deliberate bank closer to the 737. Gasps erupted across the rows. A woman screamed. Someone muttered, "They're lining up. Oh God." The captain's voice returned, sharper now. Everyone stay calm. Stay in your seats. Everything is under control. But it wasn't. Not inside the cabin. A man stood abruptly, ignoring the seatbelt sign, his face flushed. This isn't right. What if they think we're hijacked? What if they shoot us down? His panic infected those around him, and soon multiple voices rose in frightened argument. The flight attendants rushed to contain it, their practiced tones faltering as they tried to soothe without admitting ignorance. In 14A, the quiet passenger finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, she reached beneath the seat for her carry-on. Her hand rested on the handle, steady and unshaken, as though she'd rehearsed this gesture 1,000 times. The student noticed, his eyes widening. What are you doing? She looked at him with calm finality. Making sure we get home. It wasn't bravado. It was certainty, the kind of certainty only someone who had faced the worst could carry. She withdrew her hand for now, letting the bag remain closed. Timing mattered. Premature action could make her as suspicious as the fear already spreading. But the decision was made. She would step forward if the captain couldn't hold control. As she watched, the flight attendants huddled near the galley, whispering urgently. One glanced back at her row. Their eyes met briefly, and the attendant froze, sensing something in her gaze, authority, experience, something unspoken that didn't belong to a random passenger. The quiet passenger gave the smallest nod, subtle, but enough. The attendant blinked, unsettled, and hurried away. The Raptors shifted again, repositioning. Their wings caught the sun, glinting sharply through the cabin windows. To most passengers, it looked like aggression. To her, it was communication. A signal she understood instinctively. They were waiting for confirmation, one way or the other. The panic in the cabin threatened to boil over. Voices overlapped, fear building to a crescendo. A woman sobbed into her husband's shoulder. A man demanded the captain open the cockpit door. Children cried. The fragile order was moments from collapse. The woman in 14 inhaled deeply, steadying herself. She had remained in the shadows long enough. Her anonymity had shielded her until now. But anonymity couldn't protect these people, not from fear, not from misunderstanding, not from the possibility of a fatal miscalculation above the clouds. She reached down once more, unzipped the side pocket of her bag, and withdrew the card. Laminated, official, edged in the seal of authority. A card that carried weight, not in its appearance, but in what it represented. She turned to the nearest flight attendant as the woman passed, trying to calm another row. Her voice was low, firm, commanding, not loud, but impossible to ignore. "I need to speak to the cockpit," she said. The attendant blinked, startled. "Ma'am? The woman held up the card. The attendant's eyes flicked down, reading the lettering, the designation, the clearance marks. Her breath caught. She looked up again, her face pale. "Now," the woman said, calm but unyielding. The attendant hesitated only a second longer, then nodded quickly and hurried toward the front. The student stared at her, mouth half open, eyes wide. "Who the hell are you?" he whispered. She didn't answer. She simply slipped the card back into her jacket, folded her hands, and stared out at the raptors holding their silent vigil. The cabin buzzed with fear and rumor, but in that single exchange, the balance shifted. For the first time, the quiet passenger was no longer invisible. She was in motion, moving toward a role no one else aboard could play. And soon, when her voice crossed the hidden frequencies of the sky, the F-22 pilots would hear a name that froze them in place. The tension had risen to its peak, and the storm was about to break. The cabin, though still shaking with nervous whispers, began to bend around the small shift no one had noticed yet. A passenger had stirred not in panic, not in fear, but with purpose. And though most of the people aboard the 737 were too consumed by dread to notice, those who did felt it like a ripple through still water. The flight attendant reappeared near row 14, her expression unreadable, but her stride more hurried than before. She leaned in close to the quiet passenger, speaking in a whisper meant to avoid notice. "Captain says he can't just let you into the cockpit." Her voice trembled. "He doesn't know you. We have procedures." The woman's gaze was steady, the faintest flicker of something dangerous in her eyes. Not anger, but authority honed over years of command. "Tell him this isn't a request," she said softly. "Tell him to confirm with NORAD, call sign, Valkyrie." The attendant's face drained of color. She almost stepped back, her lips parting as if to argue, but she thought better of it. She nodded quickly and turned again for the cockpit, clutching the weight of those two syllables in her chest. Valkyrie. The student in the next seat leaned forward, his curiosity boiling over. "That's it, isn't it? That's your name, the one they'll know. Who are you really? CIA? Military? You don't just drop something like that and stay calm." She didn't answer. Her eyes followed the faint shimmer of jet fuel outside the window where the F-22 still danced in formation. Inside her head, though, memories unfurled. Call signs weren't names. They were legacies, stories carved into the bones of the air itself. Valkyrie had been more than a name. It was a symbol whispered in briefing rooms and fighter hangars. A call sign that once meant extraction, salvation, and wrath wrapped in a single voice. And now that voice was about to speak again. The cockpit door cracked open just slightly, enough for a sliver of light to spill into the dim cabin. The captain himself stepped out, his brow furrowed, his hand gripping the frame tightly. His eyes scanned the rows until they landed on her. "You," he said, not loudly, but firmly. "You asked for something. Identification." She rose slowly, sliding her carry-on from beneath the seat and walked forward. Her movement was deliberate, calm, controlled. No wasted steps. No hesitation. As if she were back on a tarmac, stepping toward her aircraft. When she reached the front, she presented her credentials. The captain took them with a frown, examining every detail. Then, as if unsure whether to believe what he was reading, he looked up into her eyes. "What do you intend to do with this?" he asked quietly, so the passengers behind wouldn't hear. Her voice was calm, steady. "I intend to prevent a mistake. Those Raptors aren't just here to scare people. They're here to make a decision if this flight doesn't answer soon." The captain's throat tightened. He looked back at the sealed door behind him. "We've been trying to re-establish contact. No success. They're demanding authentication codes, and we can't. You can't, because they won't accept them from you." She interrupted gently but firmly. "They'll accept them from me." Silence hung for a moment. Behind them, passengers leaned, craning to see. A mother hushed her child. A man whispered, "What's going on up there?" The captain handed back the ID, still visibly torn. His training warred with the urgency in her eyes. Protocol versus instinct. "What's your name?" he finally asked, though the name on the card was right there. She met his gaze without flinching. "You don't need my name," she said. "You just need my call sign." The weight of it settled between them like thunder waiting to break. He hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Come with me." The murmurs behind them swelled, passengers whispering in frantic confusion, as the cockpit door opened wide enough to admit her. She stepped inside, the hush of the secure space closing around her like a seal. The first officer glanced up, startled by her presence. "Captain, who? She has clearance." The captain cut in quickly, though his tone betrayed uncertainty. "She says she can handle it." The woman settled into the jump seat behind the pilots, strapping herself in with practiced ease. She reached for the radio panel without hesitation, her hands moving as if they had never left the controls. The first officer looked back, eyes narrowing. "You've done this before." She didn't answer. Instead, she flicked the switch, brought the mic close, and for the first time in years, let her voice cross the guarded airwaves. "No Zara AD control. This is Valkyrie. Confirm authentication." For a heartbeat, there was only static. Then a burst of noise, followed by a voice sharp and urgent. "Say again?" "Identify." Her tone didn't waver. "Valkyrie. Authentication code Delta 71 Charlie. Cross-check your records." The cockpit was silent, except for the hiss of the radio. The captain and first officer stared wide-eyed at the woman who only minutes ago had been another face in the crowd. The reply came back quickly, but it wasn't calm. It was startled, almost disbelieving. "Valkyrie. Stand by." Confirming with command. "Do not disconnect." Outside the cockpit, the Raptors shifted position again, pulling closer, their sleek frames cutting like blades through the air. To the passengers, it looked like a threat. But to her, it was recognition. They'd heard her. The captain leaned back, his voice low. They know you. They remember me," she corrected softly. Behind them, in the cabin, people were still panicking, still whispering prayers and threats and desperate questions. None of them understood that the true decision was being made, not in their frightened words, but in the steady rhythm of one voice over military channels. She held the mic firm, eyes locked on the horizon. She had been quiet for so long, letting the world move past her, hiding in the anonymity of civilian life. But in this moment, the quiet passenger had ceased to exist. Only Valkyrie remained, and every fighter pilot in the sky knew what that name meant. For a long suspended moment, the cockpit was silent, except for the hiss of static across the radio. The captain and first officer stared at the woman in the jump seat, as if waiting for the universe itself to explain her presence. She sat calm, hands steady on the mic, her breathing controlled as though she had spent her life waiting for this exact call. Then the frequency crackled alive. Valkyrie, NORAD control. Confirm again. Authentication received. Stand by for immediate patch. Her lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, not relief, not pride, but recognition. The wheels were in motion now. The name she had carried once in war zones and clandestine operations had been pulled back into the light. Within seconds, another voice came online. Deeper, older. Authority radiated through every syllable. Valkyrie, this is Eagle Command. Negative visual confirmation, but, God, it's been years. Say your status. The captain's hand trembled against the yoke. He glanced back at her. They know you? She nodded once. They do. She pressed the mic again, her tone professional, precise. Valkyrie, present and verified. Commercial Flight 71 Charlie intercepted. Situation: communications loss with a TC. No hostile action. Repeat, no hostile action. Request stand down of F-22 intercept. Permission to escort. Silence answered her again. But this time, it was a different kind of silence, disbelieving. Charged, electric. In the background of the transmission, faint voices could be heard. Hurried, incredulous, almost reverent. Her name was spreading through the chain of command like a shockwave. When the next voice returned, it was tight with awe. Copy, Valkyrie. Raptors have been notified. Hold channel open. Outside the cockpit windows, the shift was immediate. The F-22s, moments ago hovering in rigid formation, banked slightly. Not in aggression, but in acknowledgement. The wingman tipped just enough for the sun to flash off its canopy. A silent salute, visible only to those who knew how to read it. The captain swallowed hard. They froze when you said it. The woman gave no answer. She didn't need to. The first officer shook his head slowly. Voice hushed. I've heard that call sign before. In training. Briefings. But it was. Stories. They said Valkyrie wasn't real. His words drew her gaze, cool and steady. Stories have power, she said simply. The cabin behind them remained in chaos, passengers whispering, crying, pressing against windows to watch the fighters outside. None of them knew the real drama wasn't the Raptor's presence, but the fact that the sky itself had just recognized someone among them. Her mic buzzed again. The voice that followed carried something heavier than protocol. Valkyrie, this is Raptor Lead, confirming visual of your flight. Permission to address? She pressed transmit. Go ahead, Led. A pause, and then words tinged with disbelief and respect. Ma'am, we were told Valkyrie was gone, retired, off the grid. We grew up hearing about you. If it's really you, it's me, she cut in gently, not arrogantly, just matter of fact. I'm here. Inside the Raptor cockpits, two pilots sat in stunned silence. They had been ready to risk their careers and their lives on orders that could have meant shooting down a civilian plane. And then, with a single call sign, the entire mission had changed. Understood, Nam, Raptor Led finally replied, his tone sharper now, transformed by recognition. Standing by. Awaiting your guidance. The captain gaped at her. Guidance? They're asking you for guidance? She lowered the mic, her eyes distant, as though looking beyond the steel and clouds into memories too vast for the present moment. When she finally spoke, it was quiet but unshakable. They always did. The first officer leaned closer, whispering urgently. What did you do? Who are you? They don't talk like that to anyone. Not even generals. Her silence was an answer in itself. Back in the cabin, The flight attendants struggled to maintain control, their voices raised to calm frightened passengers. Snippets floated toward the cockpit. "They're too close. Why won't anyone tell us? We're going to die here." Fear built like static electricity, ready to spark into chaos. The captain started to rise. "I should stay seated," she interrupted firmly. "They don't need words right now. They need stability. Let me handle the air. You keep this plane steady." It was said with such certainty that the captain obeyed before realizing he had. The mic crackled once more. This time, the voice belonged to Nord itself. "Valkyrie, command again. Raptors confirm stand-down posture. This incident will be logged under your authority. Can you maintain escort until re-established with a TC?" "Affirmative," she replied, her tone clipped, efficient. "Flight will comply. Advise ATC comes blackout duration, then handover." The reply came with something almost unheard of in military communications: gratitude. "Roger that, Valkyrie, and welcome back." The words hung in the cockpit like a ghost returned. The first officer stared at her, his disbelief finally spilling into words. "Welcome back? Back from what?" Her gaze flicked to him, sharp but unreadable. "That's classified." He almost laughed, but there was no humor in it, only nervous awe. The Raptors outside repositioned, their movements precise, elegant. They weren't hurting the 737 anymore. They were protecting it. Their angles shifted into escort formation, wings aligned with intention. The passengers noticed. Through the windows came murmurs. "They're pulling away a little. They're not aiming at us anymore. What's happening?" Hope flickered, faint but real. The student from row 14 pressed his face against the window, eyes wide. He turned toward the front, catching a glimpse of her silhouette through the cockpit crack before the door sealed shut again. He whispered to himself, almost reverent. She did that. Inside, the captain turned back toward her, voice low, shaken. "I don't understand. Why would they give you the authority? Why do they? Sound like they're talking to a superior?" Her reply was simple. "Because to them I am." And though no one on the civilian flight could know the details, every pilot within 1,000 miles now knew the truth. Valkyrie was alive. The Raptor's acknowledgement was more than respect. It was confirmation that a call sign whispered in legend still had the power to bend the course of missions, of lives, of history itself. The quiet passenger was no longer invisible. The name had been spoken, and the world had listened. The call sign was revealed, and the sky had frozen in its presence. The cabin of Flight 71 Charlie felt different now, though most of the passengers couldn't have said why. The same metal walls enclosed them, the same steady hum of engines pressed into their ears. The same fighter jets still stalked their path through the stratosphere, but something had shifted. It was subtle at first, like a current beneath the surface of deep water. Fear still lingered in every whispered conversation, every wide-eyed glance toward the windows, but the panic no longer had claws. It had softened, dulled, as though some invisible hand had steadied the trembling air. In the cockpit, Valkyrie leaned back slightly in the jump seat, her headset still alive with encrypted chatter. The F-22 pilots outside spoke less now, but when they did, their voices carried a new tone, not the hard-edged professionalism of interceptors on high alert, but something warmer, more deferential. "Valkyrie, Raptor lead. Escort established. Holding starboard flank. You give the word. We'll shadow you all the way to D, see?" She replied with the same clipped calm as before. "Acknowledged, lead. Maintain visual. No aggressive posture. Civilian cabin is watching. Copy that, Mom." The mom came without hesitation, and in that one syllable, the balance of power in the sky shifted. These were pilots at the cutting edge of modern warfare, entrusted with billion-dollar aircraft and split-second authority to end lives. Yet at the sound of her voice, they deferred not to rank, not to current command, but to reputation. To legend. The captain exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. His co-pilot sat stiff in his chair, knuckles white against the controls, but his eyes kept darting toward Valkyrie, as though expecting her to sprout wings herself. "This doesn't make sense," the captain muttered, almost to himself. "They were ready to treat us as hostile. Now they're talking to you like I never left," she finished for him. He turned, brow furrowed. "You did leave, didn't you?" Her eyes flicked toward the window, where sunlight caught the raptor's wing. "You never really leave," she said softly. "Not when your name's written in the sky." Back in the cabin, the whispers continued. The businessman with the laptop had given up pretending to work. His hands hovered nervously over the keyboard, his gaze fixed out the window at the angular shapes gliding alongside. The mother with 2 children was calmer, now still holding her youngest, but less rigid, less desperate. Something had reassured her, though she couldn't have said what. Row 14, where Valkyrie had sat, was abuzz. The student who had spoken to her earlier leaned into the aisle, whispering animatedly to a fellow passenger. "She's not just some random person. I swear, she knew this would happen. She had ID. She walked straight to the cockpit. You saw it, right?" The other passenger nodded uneasily. "I saw something. She didn't look scared, that's for sure." "No," the student pressed, eyes gleaming with something between awe and fear. "Not scared at all. Like she belonged there. Like those jets weren't for us, they were for her." The rumor began to spread. Quietly at first, like smoke curling beneath a door, then faster. Words passed from row to row, whispers layered atop whispers. "She's military. She's CIA. She's someone important. She's why the jets aren't firing." No one had the truth, but the truth didn't matter. What mattered was the shift. The passengers no longer felt abandoned, prey waiting for judgment in the sky. They felt protected. The flight attendants sensed it too. Their voices grew steadier as they made passes through the aisles, checking belts, handing out water to soothe trembling hands. They didn't explain what had changed. They didn't know. Enough to explain, but they carried themselves with more confidence now. Something in the front of the plane had convinced them things would end safely. In the cockpit, Valkyrie kept her voice calm and steady over the comms, but her mind was anything but still. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest. The reawakening of a role she had sworn was behind her. Every syllable of "ma'am," every deferential pause from the raptors outside, dragged her backward in time. The desert air of Kandahar, the acrid burn of jet fuel on a carrier deck. Radios crackling, her voice cutting through chaos. Men and women clinging to the sound of it like a lifeline. Valkyrie. She closed her eyes briefly. The ghosts of missions past stirred around her, silent but heavy. She had never wanted to be that voice again, never wanted the sky to remember her name. But here she was. And the sky remembered. "Command to Valkyrie," the radio buzzed again. "Be advised, FAA comms will be restored within 5 mics. Raptors will hold escort until handover. Confirm situation stable on board." Her gaze slid toward the captain and first officer. The captain gave a quick nod, his expression weary but calmer than before. She pressed the transmit key. "Command, cabin stable. Recommend minimal escalation civilians, spooked enough as it is." "Copy that." "Valkyrie." "Noted." "Command out." The line fell silent. The first officer swiveled in his chair, staring at her like she was some phantom. "You talk to them like you never left the chain of command. Like you're still in charge." She gave him a look that silenced him instantly. Not sharp, not angry, but resolute. Because for the moment, I am. Outside, one of the Raptors drifted closer, just enough for the pilot inside to be visible through the canopy. He raised a gloved hand, tapping 2 fingers to his helmet in a crisp salute before sliding back into formation. The captain blinked, stunned. Did he just salute you? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The shift was complete now. Fear still lingered, but it no longer dominated. The passengers were no longer prey, waiting for judgment. They were cargo under escort, guarded by wings of steel. The flight crew no longer felt like a crew abandoned at the mercy of the sky. They were part of something larger, something guided. And at the center of it sat the quiet passenger, no longer anonymous, no longer invisible. Valkyrie. Her name had turned fear into order, panic into discipline, chaos into calm. But even as the tension eased, she knew it wasn't over. Legends carried burdens, and once the world remembered you, it didn't forget so easily. The sky had shifted in her presence, and when they landed, the earth would follow. The descent began slowly, methodically. The passengers had settled back into their seats, the earlier panic tempered but still palpable. Their eyes, however, no longer carried the raw fear of an imminent threat. They now glimmered with curiosity, awe, and a quiet relief they didn't yet understand. The Raptor escorts mirrored the Boeing's movements, holding steady alongside, protective wings like silent guardians slicing through the late afternoon sky. In the cockpit, Valkyrie's focus never wavered. Her hands rested lightly on the controls, her gaze sweeping between the altimeter, the instruments, and the views outside the windows. Every motion was precise, every decision calculated. There was no room for error. The weight of hundreds of souls rested on her shoulders, and she bore with the calm that had become second nature. The captain sat back in his seat, exhaling slowly. I never thought I'd see the day. A passenger. Managing a situation like this. Not a passenger, she corrected softly, eyes still scanning the instruments. I'm just the one who remembers what's at stake. The first officer exchanged a glance with her. You really do belong here. Every time we needed authority. Every time decisions mattered. It's like you never left. She let a faint, almost imperceptible nod acknowledge his words, but she didn't speak again. Her focus remained on the sky and the instruments that recorded every foot of altitude, every subtle shift of airspeed. The quiet stillness of the moment belied the legacy of controlled chaos she had carried in the past, and now she carried it again. Outside, the Raptors began easing away from formation, maintaining visual, but giving space for the Boeing to navigate the controlled airspace around Washington, D.C. Their movements were smooth, deliberate, almost ceremonial. To the passengers peering out the windows, it looked like military precision, the performance of power. To Valkyrie, it was acknowledgement, an assurance that the world beyond the cabin had recognized her authority and was cooperating with it without a word needing to be spoken. She finally allowed herself a brief glance toward the cabin. The passengers were quiet now, their conversations hushed, eyes occasionally darting toward her seat in wonder. Some had heard the term Valkyrie whispered by the flight attendants, or glimpsed her interaction with the cockpit and the comms. Others still assumed she was simply a military consultant traveling incognito. None of them would ever know the full truth. The mother across the aisle adjusted her children's seatbelts, her hands still trembling slightly. She whispered, "Everything's okay now," though her eyes were drawn to the quiet figure near the front, sensing the gravity she could not name. The student in 14B leaned forward one final time, whispering to a friend, "That woman? She's like a ghost." The pilots listened to her. The planes listened to her. She saved us without a word to anyone else. The words, though spoken softly, summed up the sentiment in the cabin. Valkyrie had moved unseen until necessary, acted decisively, and ensured that fear turned to security without fanfare. Her presence alone had altered the course of the flight. As the Boeing approached its final descent, air traffic control re-established direct communication. Valkyrie, still in the jump seat, monitored the frequencies, confirming handovers and ensuring the Raptor's escort ended without incident. Flight 71 Charlie. Her voice was calm and professional over the standard civilian channel now. Cleared for final approach. All systems stable. Civilian communication restored. Thank you. Even though the passengers didn't fully understand what had occurred, the reassurance in her tone carried weight. They believed it, perhaps instinctively, because they had watched someone move through crisis with authority far beyond the ordinary. The plane's wheels touched the tarmac with a gentle but confident precision, the landing smooth enough to betray the underlying tension of the last hour. Applause erupted from some passengers, small but heartfelt, though many remained silent, still processing the surreal hours they had just endured. Outside, the Raptor pilots saluted once more before pulling away, their silhouettes fading into the clouds. Valkyrie watched them leave, knowing that in the upper atmosphere, respect had been paid, and acknowledgement had been made without words. The Boeing taxied toward the gate, guided by ground control now. Valkyrie rose from the jump seat, folded her hands neatly in front of her, and gave the captain and first officer a brief nod. You did well, the captain said quietly, almost as if reluctant to acknowledge the extent of her role. And you, she replied softly. You kept them calm. That was necessary too. The plane stopped, engines winding down, the hum fading into silence. Passengers stirred, gathering their belongings, murmuring about the extraordinary event. A few glanced toward her, wondering, questioning, unsure if they had glimpsed a legend or simply an extraordinary human being. Valkyrie collected her carry-on quietly, sliding the card back into the pocket of her jacket. She didn't seek recognition. She had never done so. She had acted because it was required, because the lives of those inside the cabin had outweighed the comfort of remaining invisible. Stepping into the aisle, she allowed the passengers to pass, nodding politely, but saying nothing. Some looked at her with gratitude, some with curiosity, but none could fully grasp the extent of what had just transpired. The flight attendants offered polite smiles, eyes wide in wonder, acknowledging her presence, but knowing better than to pry. The captain watched her move toward the exit, silently amazed, a respect forming that couldn't be articulated in words. Outside the terminal, the city bustled. Life moved forward as it always did, oblivious to the drama above. Valkyrie stepped off the plane into the warm sunlight, her posture calm, her expression neutral. For a moment, she paused, taking in the ordinary world around her cab's honking, people moving with purpose, the distant rumble of traffic. She had returned to the world she had once left behind, but the sky had already remembered her. The call sign Valkyrie had been spoken again, etched into the memories of those who had witnessed it, and transmitted through the pilots who knew its weight. And like all legends, she would fade into anonymity once more, leaving only whispers, memories, and awe behind. The quiet passenger had vanished, leaving behind not fear, not chaos, but a legacy, a reminder that even in ordinary places, extraordinary forces could operate unseen, guiding, protecting, and shaping the world without seeking praise. She walked away from the terminal, blending into the flow of the city, leaving behind nothing but the echo of a name that would resonate in the upper atmosphere for decades, Valkyrie. And for those who had witnessed her presence today, that name would forever carry the weight of calm authority, decisive action, and the quiet heroism that sometimes passes through the world unnoticed until the moment it matters most.